Walter Bramble and the Ferryman's Rest. Walter Bramble locked the library door at 5 minutes past 5, which was later than he meant to, and later than Mrs. Finch would have approved of, though Mrs. Finch was not there to disapprove, and so the lateness belonged to him alone. The evening had the kind of light in it that made him walk slower than usual, gold going soft at the edges, the sky the colour of a page left too long in the sun. He did not have anywhere to be, which was, he thought, the nicest kind of evening to have. There was a ferry that crossed the river at Marlstone Deep, a small flat boat that had been crossing that same stretch of water for longer than Walter had been alive, and he decided, without deciding it exactly, that he would take it. Not to get anywhere, just to be on the water while the light did what it was doing. The path down to the ferry point ran along the backs of gardens where hedges had grown untidy and comfortable, and where somebody's washing still hung pale on a line, forgotten until morning. A blackbird was singing from the top of a damson tree, the way blackbirds do at that hour, as though they had saved their best song for last. Walter stopped to listen for a moment. Then he walked on, because the ferry would not wait even for a blackbird. The ferryman's name was Silas Newby, and Walter did not know this because Silas had ever told him, but because it was painted, small and faded, on a board nailed above the little wooden hut where the tickets were sold, though nobody had sold a ticket there in years. You paid Silas directly, coins into a tin that had once held travel sweets. He was somewhere past 70, Walter guessed, though he had the kind of face that made guessing difficult, weathered in a way that could have been 60 years of river or 80. His hands were the hands of a man who had held the same rope for a very long time. "Evening," Silas said, when Walter came down the last few steps to the landing. "Last crossing of the day, if you are wanting it." "I am wanting it," Walter said. "Then you had better get on," said Silas, "before the light decides to leave without us." The ferry was a flat, wide thing, built for carrying more than it usually carried, with a low rail on either side that had been painted so many times the paint had begun to feel like part of the wood. Walter was the only passenger. He stood near the front, though front and back meant very little on a boat that went one way, and then simply went back the other, pulled along a cable that ran from bank to bank, low under the surface except where it broke through in a silver seam. Silas took hold of the rope that ran hand over hand along the guide cable, and the ferry began to move, slow and certain, the water folding quietly against the hull. 40 years I have been doing this crossing," Silas said, not as though it were a remarkable thing to say, but as though it was simply the next thing to say. "Same stretch of water, same 40 yards, near enough." "That is a great many crossings," Walter said. "It is," Silas agreed. "I have never counted them properly. I expect somebody has, somewhere, but it was not me." The river at that hour was the colour of pewter, with gold laid thin across the top of it, and it moved without hurrying, the way rivers do when they have a long way still to go, and no particular reason to rush the going. A heron stood at the far bank, one leg tucked up beneath it, watching the water for something that had not yet decided to appear. "Do you ever tire of it?" Walter asked. "The same crossing, I mean. Every day." Silas considered this, the way a man considers a question he has been asked many times, but has never quite finished answering. "I do not think so," he said. "The water is never quite the same water. I know that sounds like something out of a book, but it is true all the same. Some evenings it is glass. Some evenings it has a temper in it. You get to know a stretch of river, the way you get to know a person's face, all the small changes that a stranger would not notice. Walter thought about this. He thought about his own days at the library, which followed one another in much the same way, book after book, hour after hour, and how he had never once thought of them as the same day repeated, though he supposed from the outside they might have looked that way. "I think I understand that better than I expected to," he said. The ferry moved on, slow enough that the crossing barely seemed to progress at all, though the far bank was, without any drama about it, getting nearer. A moorhen paddled past, close to the hull, unbothered, its small wake spreading out behind it in a neat arrow. "What would you say," Walter asked, "makes a good day? You have had rather a lot of them to compare out here." Silas did not answer straight away. He let the rope run through his hands for a moment, unhurried, watching the middle distance the way a man watches something he has watched before and expects to watch again. "I do not think a good day needs very much in it," he said at last. "That is the thing people get wrong about it, I have always thought. They go looking for a good day the way you would go looking for a large fish. All that effort, all that waiting, and half the time you come home with nothing at all. And the other half? The other half you catch something, and it turns out to be smaller than you wanted, and you are disappointed with a fish that would have made you very happy indeed if you had not gone looking for something bigger." Walter smiled at that, a slow smile, the kind that took its time arriving. "So, what is the alternative?" he asked. "Not going looking," Silas said. "A good day is mostly made of small things that were already there. The light doing something interesting to the water. A cup of tea that is the right temperature when you finally get to drink it. Somebody saying good evening to you and meaning it. I have had a great many good days out here, and I could not point to one single thing in most of them that anybody else would think was worth mentioning." "That sounds like a quiet way to live," Walter said. "It is a quiet way to live," Silas said. "I have never seen the difficulty in that." They were nearing the middle of the river now, where the current ran a little stronger, and the ferry's motion changed slightly. A small, firm push against the hull that Silas answered without seeming to think about it, the rope moving through his hands in the same steady rhythm as before. "Do you not miss having somewhere to be?" Walter asked. "Somewhere new, I mean. Different water." "I went to look at different water once," Silas said. "Spent a fortnight by the sea. Years ago now. It was very fine, very large. I did not know what to do with all that largeness, if I'm honest with you. I found myself missing the shape of this river before the week was out. 40 yards of water does not sound like very much to build a life around, but I have never found the edges of it, not really. There is always something new in it, if you look properly." Walter looked down at the water sliding past the hull, dark now, the gold almost gone from it, though a last thin band of it still lay along the horizon behind them, over the roofs of the village they had left. "I think I have spent my life doing something similar," he said. "The same shelves, the same books, mostly, going out and coming back. I used to think I should want more than that. I'm not sure I do any longer." "Then you have got there quicker than I did," Silas said. "It took me the better part of the fortnight by the sea to work that out about myself, and I still went back for a second week before I let myself believe it." They both laughed a little at that, quiet laughter, the kind that did not need to travel far to be heard. The far bank was close now, close enough that Walter could see the shape of the landing, the old stone steps worn soft in the middle, where several generations of feet had worn them that way, and a lantern that Silas must light later, though it was not lit yet, the last of the daylight still doing its job well enough on its own. "It is a short crossing," Walter said. "Shorter than I remembered." "They are all short," Silas said. 40 yards is 40 yards, however slowly you take it. I have found it does not do to measure a crossing by how far it goes. Better to measure it by what you noticed on the way." "And what did you notice on this one?" Walter asked. Silas thought about it, unhurried, the way he seemed to think about everything. "A heron that did not catch anything," he said. "A moor hen that was in rather more of a hurry than either of us, and a passenger who asked me a question I do not often get asked, and gave me the chance to think about my own life for the length of a crossing, which does not happen every day, even out here." The ferry touched the landing with the smallest of bumps, more felt than heard, and Silas made the rope fast to the iron ring set into the stone, a knot he must have tied 10,000 times, his hands moving without needing to be told what to do. "Thank you for the crossing," Walter said. "Thank you for the company," Silas said. "It is a long evening on your own, some nights." Walter stepped off onto the worn stone steps and turned back for a moment, the way you do when you're leaving somewhere that has been, for a few minutes, entirely peaceful. "Will you take her back across empty then?" he asked. "Now that I am your last passenger." "I will," Silas said. "I do not mind that crossing. It is a good one to end the day on. No talking required, and the light usually finishes its business somewhere in the middle of the river, which is as good a place as any to watch it happen." "Then I hope it does something worth watching," Walter said. "It generally does," Silas said. "It has not let me down yet, not in 40 years. He unhitched the rope and pushed off from the landing with the ease of a man who had done it every evening of his working life, and the ferry began its slow return, the small flat shape of it growing smaller against the darkening water. Silas a still figure at its centre, his hands moving steadily along the guide rope, unhurried, patient, entirely at home. Walter stood on the steps a while longer, watching the boat go, listening to the quiet sound of the water against the hull growing fainter with distance, until the ferry was little more than a shape, and then little more than a suggestion of a shape, somewhere in the soft grey middle of the river. He thought about small things then. A cup of tea at the right temperature, a heron that had caught nothing and did not seem to mind, 40 yards of water that a man had found endlessly new for 40 years. He turned at last and walked up from the landing, along a path he did not know well, in the direction of nowhere in particular, in no hurry at all to arrive. The last of the light went out of the sky somewhere behind him, quietly, the way it always does, without announcing that it has gone, and Walter walked on into the soft blue beginning of the evening, thinking of rivers and rest and the small, unremarkable shape of a good day. Walter Bramble had heard about the old mill pond from a returned book of all things, a slim guide to local walks that somebody had left tucked inside a returned copy of a novel, as though it had been used as a bookmark and then forgotten there. He found the page turned down at the corner. A mill pond, the guide said, 1/2 a mile beyond the church, reached by a path that most people had stopped using since the road went in. Walter decided that an unused path was exactly the sort of path worth using. He set out on a Sunday afternoon when the library was closed, and the whole of the day belonged to him in a way that weekdays never quite managed. The path was narrower than he expected, hemmed in on both sides by hedgerow that had not been cut in some time, and it smelled of nettles and warm earth and faintly of something sweeter that he could not place until he passed a stand of meadow, sweet growing wild at the edge of a ditch. He walked slowly, without meaning to, the way a person walks when nothing at all is waiting for them at the other end. He passed a stile that had lost most of its lower step, and a field beyond it where sheep grazed in loose, companionable clusters, not one of them lifting its head as he went past. The mill itself was long gone. Only the pond remained, and a low stone wall around it, and the broken teeth of a sluice gate that no longer had any water to hold back. The pond was still. Not still in the ordinary way that ponds are still, but still in a deeper way, as though the water had given up moving some years before and had never seen a reason to start again. Walter sat on the wall. He had brought nothing with him. No book, no flask, nothing to do, which had felt like an oversight when he left the house, and now felt like exactly the right amount of preparation. For a while he simply looked at the water and let the afternoon settle around him the way a coat settles once you have stopped adjusting it. A dragonfly crossed the pond in a straight blue line and vanished into the reeds on the far side. Somewhere behind him a woman's voice said, "They have always liked it here. I could never tell you why." Walter turned. An elderly woman stood a little way along the wall, a basket over one arm, watching the water with the particular patience of somebody who had watched it many times before. "I did not mean to intrude," Walter said. "You have not," she said. "The wall is wide enough for two, and the pond does not belong to either of us." She came and sat some distance along from him, close enough for conversation, far enough to leave the stillness mostly intact. She told him her name was Agnes Corrie, and that her grandfather had been the miller, though the mill had stopped turning before she was born, and all she had ever known of it was the pond and the broken sluice and a photograph, curling at the corners, that hung in her hallway. "Do you come here often?" Walter asked. "Every Sunday," Agnes said. "It is not a habit I have ever examined too closely. I think if I examined it, it might stop being a comfort and start being a duty, and I have quite enough duties as it is." Walter smiled at that. "I think I understand," he said. "I have a walk to work that takes 5 minutes, and I have never once tried to make it shorter." "Then you already know what I am talking about," Agnes said. She set her basket down on the wall between them, and Walter saw that it held nothing but a folded cloth and a small tin, the sort a person might carry out of habit rather than necessity. "What is in the basket?" he asked, before he could decide whether the question was too forward. "Bread, mostly," Agnes said. "For the ducks, though there have not been ducks here in some years. I still bring it. I suppose I have not quite caught up with the pond on that particular point." "What happened to them?" "I could not tell you," she said. "They were here, and then one spring they were not. Ponds lose things quietly. They do not make an announcement of it." They sat for a while without speaking, which did not feel to Walter like an absence of conversation, but like a continuation of it in a quieter register. The water held the sky in it, pale and unbroken, disturbed only where the dragonfly returned, hovered, and set off again in another straight line, as though it were stitching something invisible across the surface. "My grandfather used to say the pond remembers everything that has ever fallen into it," Agnes said eventually. "Leaves, rain, the odd unlucky hat. He said it never gives any of it back, and that is why it is so still. It has stopped trying to sort through what it is holding." "That is a generous way to think about stillness," Walter said. "I had always thought of it as the absence of something, You make it sound more like a kind of acceptance." "I think that is exactly what it is," Agnes said. "The pond is not waiting for the mill to start again. It gave that up a long time ago. It is simply being a pond, as well as it knows how." A moorhen picked its way along the far bank, testing each reed stem before trusting its weight to it, and somewhere beyond the hedgerow a church bell marked the half-hour, faint and unhurried, as though it too had learned not to rush the telling of the time. "Do you ever think of clearing the sluice?" Walter asked. "Letting it run again?" Agnes shook her head, slow and certain. "I thought about it once, a long time ago. There was a nephew of mine, full of plans, who wanted to have the whole thing restored, wheel and all. He drew up sketches, very serious ones, and then he moved away, and the sketches went into a drawer, and the pond stayed exactly as it was." "You were not tempted?" "I was tempted for about a fortnight," she said. "Then I came and sat here on a Sunday, much as we are sitting now, and I understood that a pond that is allowed to be still is a rarer thing than a mill that turns. There are rivers enough that are busy going somewhere. I have grown fond of the one thing near me that has decided it is already there." Walter looked out over the water again at the pale, unbroken sky lying flat across it, and thought that he had rarely heard anyone put so simply a thing he had spent a good deal of his own life quietly working out for himself. "I have a friend who ferries people across a river not far from here," he said. "He told me something rather similar, that a good day does not need very much in it. I think you and he would understand one another." "I expect we would," Agnes said, and there was something pleased in the way she said it, as though it did her good to hear that her particular way of thinking had company elsewhere in the world. People who spend their lives near water tend to arrive at the same conclusions eventually. It has a way of teaching patience to anyone willing to sit still long enough to be taught. "I think I shall come here again," Walter said, "if that would not intrude on your Sundays." "It would not intrude in the slightest," Agnes said. "The wall, as I said, is wide enough for two. The pond has certainly never complained about the company." They sat a while longer as the afternoon eased itself toward evening, the light thickening gradually, gold gathering low along the water without any hurry to arrive there. The dragonfly made one last pass and did not come back. The moorhen settled somewhere unseen among the reeds. A light breeze moved once through the reeds at the far bank, and then thought better of it, and the pond returned to its stillness as though nothing at all had happened. "Do you still put the bread out?" Walter asked, nodding toward the basket. "Even with no ducks to eat it?" "I do," Agnes said. "Something eats it by morning. A fox, I expect, or the moorhens have taken more of an interest than I give them credit for. I have stopped needing to know exactly who. It felt important once, knowing where a thing went. It does not feel important any longer." She rose then, gathering her basket, and gave Walter a small nod that seemed to close the afternoon as gently as it had opened. "Until next Sunday, then," she said. "Until next Sunday," Walter agreed. She went back the way she had come, along the narrow-hedged path, pausing once at the stile to scatter the last of the bread along the bank without ceremony, and then she was gone, and Walter stayed a little longer on the wall, alone now, with the pond and its long, patient memory of everything it had ever been given and never once given back. He thought of leaves and rain and the odd, unlucky hat. He thought that stillness, properly understood, was not an absence at all. When at last he stood to go, the water had not moved. And he found, as he took the path home in the softening light, that he had not moved very much either, not in any way that mattered, and that this too felt like exactly the right amount of change for one quiet Sunday to hold. He walked home slowly, past the stile with its missing step, and the sheep in the field beyond lay now in the grass rather than standing in it, dark, unmoving shapes against the last of the light. He thought, as he walked, that he would come again next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, for as long as Agnes Corrie kept bringing bread that no ducks would ever eat, and the pond kept its long, unhurried silence, exactly as it had always done, and exactly as it seemed content to go on doing. Walter Bramble discovered the canal by accident, which was, he had come to believe, the only reliable way to discover anything worth discovering. He had taken a wrong turning on his way back from a book sale in the next village, a turning that led him down a lane he did not recognize, past a row of cottages he did not recognize either, and had ended, quite without warning, at a small, hump-backed bridge with water moving slowly beneath it. He stopped on the bridge and looked down. The canal ran narrow and green between its banks, moving with such little urgency that it seemed less like a current and more like a very long, very patient decision being made. A moorhen paddled along the near edge, leaving behind it a wake that closed over almost as soon as it opened. Beside the bridge stood a lock, its gates dark with age, and beside the lock stood a cottage with a garden that had clearly been someone's whole occupation for a great many years. Roses grew up one wall in a way that looked encouraged rather than accidental. A row of runner beans climbed a wigwam of canes with the particular thoroughness of a crop that had never once been allowed to want for water. Walter left his car by the bridge, for no better reason than that the afternoon had opened up in front of him with nothing in it, and he had found over the years that afternoons like that were worth walking into rather than driving past. The lockkeeper was called Ivor Pask, and Walter learned this within the first 2 minutes of their acquaintance, because Ivor Pask was the sort of man who told you his name before you had thought to ask for it, as though withholding it even briefly would have been a kind of rudeness. He was working a spade into a bed of runner beans when Walter came down the towpath, and he straightened slowly, the particular slowness of a man who has learned exactly how much his back will forgive him. "Afternoon," Ivor said. "You will forgive me if I keep at this. The beans do not much care whether I have a visitor." "Please," Walter said, "I did not mean to interrupt." "You have not interrupted anything that minded being interrupted," Ivor said. "That is more than I can say for most of what I do out here." Walter came to lean on the fence at the edge of the garden, and for a while he simply watched Ivor work, the spade going in at a steady angle, the soil turning dark and damp where it had been. There was no boat on the canal. There had been no boat, Walter realized, since he had arrived, and there was something in that absence that felt less like emptiness and more like a held breath. The whole scene seemed content to keep holding. "Do many boats come through?" Walter asked. "Fewer than there used to be," Ivor said. "A handful a week in the season. Sometimes none at all for a fortnight together. I do not mind it either way. The lock does not need company to be a lock. It only needs water, and it has always had that." He set the spade down at last, and wiped his hands on a cloth that hung from his belt for exactly that purpose, and came to join Walter at the fence, looking back over his own garden the way a person looks at something they have made so many times they have stopped quite seeing it, and then, occasionally, see it again all at once. "I have kept this lock for 31 years, he said. "My father kept it for 26 before me. Between the two of us, we have opened and closed those gates more times than either of us ever thought to count. and I could not tell you, if you asked me directly, what the number might come to." "Does it not feel repetitive?" Walter asked. "The same gates, the same water, year after year?" Ivor considered the question with the unhurried seriousness of a man who had been asked it before, by other people, on other afternoons, and had never quite tired of turning it over again. "I do not think of it as repeating," he said. "A lock does the same thing every time, that is true enough. Fill it, empty it, up or down. But the boat is never the same boat, and the water is never quite the same water, and I am not, if I am honest with you, quite the same man I was doing it yesterday. The gates do not change. Everything around the gates changes constantly. I have found that is enough." Walter looked along the towpath where the canal ran off in a long green curve toward a line of willows that leaned out over the water on the far bank, their lowest branches trailing the surface, stirring it just enough to break the stillness into something that moved without ever quite arriving anywhere. "I keep a library," Walter said. "I had not thought of it in quite those terms before. The same shelves, but never the same books going out, never the same hands taking them." "Then you already understand it better than most people who ask me that question," Ivor said. "Most people think stillness and repetition are the same thing. I've never found that to be true. Repetition is doing the same thing without noticing it. Stillness is doing the same thing and noticing everything." A dragonfly, or perhaps the same one Walter had seen at the mill pond some weeks before, though he could not have said for certain, crossed low over the surface of the canal and touched down for a moment on a lily pad near the lock gate, wings folded, entirely still. "Would you like to see inside the cottage?" Ivor asked. "My wife kept a kettle on more often than not. I have never quite lost the habit, even though there is only ever the one cup wanted now." Walter accepted and followed him along a narrow brick path between the beans and a bed of sweet peas that had climbed higher than either of them, into a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke and something baked some hours before. Ivor made tea in a pot that had clearly outlived several replacements of its lid, judging by the way the current lid did not quite match the rest of it, and they sat at a small table by the window, from which the lock and the garden and the long green curve of the canal were all visible at once, arranged like a single unhurried photograph. She used to say the canal was the only thing in her life that never asked her for anything, Ivor said, nodding toward the window, though he did not say who she was, and Walter did not ask, understanding without needing to be told. It did not need feeding, it did not need mending, beyond what I could manage myself. It simply went on being exactly what it was, morning and evening, and she found that restful toward the end, when everything else in her life seemed to want more from her than she had left to give. "That sounds like a rare thing to find restful in," Walter said. "I think it is a rare thing to notice," Ivor said. "Most people look at a stretch of still water and see nothing happening." She looked at it and saw everything happening very slowly in a way that did not need her to keep up with it. They drank their tea without hurrying it, the way the whole afternoon seemed to have agreed to be conducted. And outside the window a single narrowboat appeared at last, far off along the curve, moving toward the lock, at a pace that made the dragonfly on the lily pad look industrious by comparison. "There is my custom for the day," Ivor said, without any particular urgency in rising. "It will be the better part of 20 minutes reaching the gates. The canal does not encourage anybody to hurry toward it, and I have never known why anybody would want to." Walter watched the boat's slow approach through the window, a name he could not yet read painted along its bow. a woman at the tiller in a wide straw hat, entirely unbothered by how long the lock might take to reach her. "I should let you get on," Walter said, though he made no move to stand. "There is time yet," Ivor said. "The gates will still be there in 10 minutes. They have been there for longer than either of us, and I expect they will manage without me for a little while longer, if it comes to that." So they sat and watched the narrowboat's unhurried progress along the green curve of the water, and Walter thought that he had come looking for nothing in particular, on a wrong turning taken by accident, and had found, instead, exactly the kind of afternoon he had not known he was looking for. When at last the boat drew near enough that Ivor rose to see to the gates, he did so without any change of pace at all, the same unhurried movement he had used with the spade, the same movement, Walter suspected, he brought to nearly everything he did. "You are welcome back," Ivor said at the cottage door, "whenever the wrong turning brings you this way again." "I think it might, now that I know it is there to be taken," Walter said. He walked back along the towpath as the light began its long, unhurried slide toward evening, past the willows trailing their branches in the water, past the lily pad where the dragonfly had long since gone, and he heard, faintly behind him, the deep wooden groan of the lock gates opening and the low voice of Ivor Pask calling some unhurried instruction to the woman at the tiller, and beneath it all the quiet, patient sound of water finding its own level, exactly as it had been doing for longer than any of them had been alive, and exactly as it seemed content to go on doing.